Okay, so picture this. You're standing on the gallows about to be executed.
Oh, wow.
You'd think fear, right? Or despair.
Yeah, definitely. Anger, maybe?
But this guy, Adolf Fischer, a labor activist, wrongly convicted back in the late 1800s,
Hmm.
instead of freaking out, he says, "This is the happiest moment of my life."
Wow. Talk about a head scratcher. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What's going on in someone's mind in that moment?
It's like, what do we even know about happiness? I mean, this is a guy about to die, and he's claiming to be happy.
It's a great example of how our intuitions about happiness can be so off.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today with Dan Gilbert's Stumbling on Happiness.
Absolutely. Gilbert argues that we're actually pretty terrible at predicting what will truly make us happy.
So we're getting to the bottom of why we seem hardwired to miss the mark on happiness.
Exactly. And one of the key reasons for this is the way our brains work. They're constantly filling in gaps in our perceptions. Like, have you ever heard of the blind spot in our vision?
Yeah, it's like our brains just invent information to fill that visual gap.
Exactly. And Gilbert points out that this filling in doesn't just happen with vision. It happens with our memories and expectations, too.
So it's not just our eyes playing tricks on us, it's our brains messing with our whole perception of reality. No wonder it's so hard to figure out what will actually make us happy.
Right. We create these mental simulations of the future, like imagining how happy we'll be with a new car or a bigger house. But we forget that those simulations are heavily influenced by our current state of mind.
So if I'm feeling stressed and run down right now, my vision of the future is probably going to be a little tainted by that.
Exactly. It's like trying to predict the weather while you're stuck in a thunderstorm.
So instead of those future simulations being a clear window into our happiness, they're more like those carnival mirrors, distorting everything.
That's a great way to put it. Gilbert calls this the realism error, mistaking our mental simulations for accurate depictions of the future. And it's a major reason why we often make decisions that we later regret.
Because we're letting how we feel in this moment dictate how we think we'll feel down the line.
It's like looking at the future through a distorted lens, colored by our present emotions, our current circumstances.
So this present moment, this now, has way more power than we realize.
Right. It's what Gilbert calls presentism, this tendency to view the past and the future through the lens of the present moment.
So like that extra slice of cake sounds amazing right now, but I guarantee I'll regret it later.
Exactly. Or think about a time when your tastes changed dramatically. Maybe
Yeah.
you used to hate a certain type of music, but now you love it.
Or those clothes I thought were amazing in high school.
Our present state really colors how we perceive not only the future, but the past as well.
Okay, so we're walking around with these brains that are basically masters of illusion when it comes to happiness. Is there any way to outsmart them?
Well, it's not easy, but there might be. Gilbert talks about these studies where people could predict their future enjoyment of an experience with surprising accuracy, but only under one condition. They had to completely ignore their own imaginations.
So no more daydreaming about that dream vacation or that perfect job.
Not quite. The key was to focus on other people's experiences instead.
So instead of reading a glowing review of a restaurant, I should just ask my friend how they felt after eating there.
Exactly. It's about tapping into genuine, in-the-moment reactions from others, rather than relying on our own potentially biased imaginations.
So we should trust our friends more than our own brains. I like the sound of that. But seriously, it's fascinating that we're so quick to trust our own judgment, even when it might be leading us astray.
It's this deep-seated need to believe in the accuracy of our own predictions.
Even if those predictions are based on faulty information and distorted memories.
It seems so. And here's another thing to consider. Our brains are wired to make comparisons to figure out what's valuable. We're constantly sizing things up, often without even realizing it.
Like when you see someone with a newer phone and suddenly yours doesn't seem as impressive.
Exactly. But here's the catch. We're often not aware of what we'll be comparing an experience to in the future.
So that new phone will eventually just become my regular phone and I'll be back to square one.
Exactly. The excitement fades, and we're left wondering why we don't feel as happy as we thought we would. We fall into the trap of thinking our enjoyment hinges solely on the object or experience itself, when really it's heavily influenced by what we're comparing it to at any given moment.
So it's not really about the thing itself, it's about the context, the comparison. That's such a mind-bending concept. So if our happiness is relative, always kind of measured against something else, does that mean like our experiences actually shape our very definition of happiness?
That's a really interesting question. And, Gilbert actually touches on this with the example of conjoined twins, Lori and Reba Chappell.
Oh, right, the twins who share a body.
Yeah. And they've said that they wouldn't want to be separated, even for all the money in the world.
Which is incredible when you think about it. It really makes you wonder if their shared experience, their unique reality, has fundamentally shaped their perception of happiness.
Right, because their baseline for comparison is totally different from ours.
Yeah, they might find immense joy in something as simple as like sharing a birthday cake, whereas we might seek that same intensity from, say, a once-in-a-lifetime trip.
Exactly. It's what Gilbert calls the experience stretching hypothesis. The idea that our definition of happiness kind of expands or contracts based on our experiences.
So because they haven't experienced that full spectrum of highs and lows that many of us have, their definition of happiness stretches to encompass those everyday moments more fully.
It's like their happy looks different from our happy because their whole frame of reference is so different.
It's like how a simple glass of water can be the most satisfying thing ever when you're totally parched, but just ordinary when you're well hydrated. The value we assign to things, even our own emotions, it all shifts depending on our own personal experiences and circumstances.
It's so true. And this actually brings us to another fascinating point that Gilbert explores how our memories, those snapshots of past experiences, aren't as reliable as we might think.
Oh, right. It's not just that our present mood can color our view of the past and the future, but our actual memories themselves are prone to distortion.
We like to think of our memories as these perfect recordings, but they're really not.
It's more like we're constantly revising and rewriting them based on how we see ourselves and the world right now.
And we tend to overemphasize the unusual events, the endings, and our current interpretation of our past selves.
It's kind of unsettling when you think about it. Like, even when we're trying to learn from our past experiences, our memories might be feeding us a skewed version of events.
That's why it's so easy to get stuck repeating the same mistakes over and over. And, one of the biggest ways our memories distort things is through what Gilbert calls the peak end rule.
The peak end rule. Does that have to do with how we remember things more vividly if they happen at the beginning or end of an experience?
Kind of. It basically says that we judge an entire experience based on its most intense moment and how it ended, often neglecting the duration or even the overall enjoyment.
So that horrible traffic jam on the way to an amazing vacation rental can overshadow the whole trip, even if the traffic was just a tiny fraction of the overall experience.
Exactly. Because our memories, they're drawn to the dramatic, not necessarily the representative.
We latch onto those peak moments, those grand finales, and let them color our whole perception of an experience, even if those moments don't really reflect the experience as a whole.
Which is why it can be so hard to accurately assess our own past happiness, let alone someone else's.
Okay, so our memories are fuzzy, our predictions are flawed, and we can't even accurately judge our own past happiness. Are we just destined to stumble around blindly, hoping to bump into happiness by pure chance? So if our memories are this unreliable and our predictions are this skewed, how do we even begin to navigate towards a happier life? It feels like we're working with faulty equipment here.
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right? But the good news is it's not about becoming these perfect happiness prophets, always knowing what's going to bring us joy.
So we don't need a crystal ball.
Definitely not. It's more about understanding our inherent biases and using that knowledge to our advantage.
So it's about working with what we've got, even if it's a little wonky. Instead of trying to eliminate those biases altogether, we can learn to recognize them and adjust our course accordingly.
Exactly. Like knowing that our present mood can color our entire outlook.
Oh yeah, like when you're on cloud nine and suddenly every decision seems like a good one, even if it's not.
Exactly. So knowing that, we might think twice about making a major life decision when we're feeling overly emotional. Whether we're super happy or super down, it's probably not the most objective headspace to be in.
It's like, don't go grocery shopping when you're hungry and don't make any big decisions when you're feeling emotionally charged. Good advice in general, I think.
Absolutely. And then there's the whole faulty memory thing, right?
Yeah.
Knowing our memories can be so easily distorted.
Like those studies where people misremembered how they felt about past relationships based on their current mood.
Exactly. So knowing that, it might be helpful to keep some kind of record of our actual experiences, almost like a happiness journal, or even just jotting down notes about what brought us genuine joy that day.
I love that. A happiness fact checker. That way we can look back and see what was really working for us instead of relying on these fuzzy, potentially biased memories.
It's about becoming more aware of our own patterns, our own internal narratives, so we can start to challenge them.
And maybe rewrite some of those narratives if they're not serving us anymore.
Exactly. And when it comes to those big, deeply ingrained societal beliefs about happiness, like those messages that tell us money or marriage or a certain number of kids equals guaranteed happiness, Gilbert encourages us to approach those with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Don't just accept something as truth just because it's a popular belief or a cultural norm. Question it. Test it out in your own life.
See if those beliefs actually hold up to your own personal experience. Because what works for one person might not work for another, and what we think will make us happy might not actually deliver.
It's about recognizing that we have more agency than we think. We're not just passive recipients of happiness. We have the power to shape it, to cultivate it in our lives.
And sometimes that means letting go of certain expectations or beliefs that aren't really serving us. Like, if chasing wealth beyond what you actually need isn't fulfilling you, maybe it's time to shift your focus to things that do.
Things that resonate with your values, things that bring you genuine joy, even if they go against the grain.
Right. Exactly. It's about being open to the possibility that our future selves might have entirely different priorities, different definitions of happiness.
And that's okay. We're allowed to evolve, to change our minds, to redefine what matters most to us.
This whole deep dive wasn't about giving you some magic formula for guaranteed happiness. It's about giving you a new framework for thinking about it.
A new lens to view it through, one that acknowledges our inherent biases, but also empowers us to work with them.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that happiness isn't this fixed destination. It's this ongoing journey of self-discovery.
It's not about stumbling on happiness, but stumbling towards it,
Yeah,
becoming more attuned to our own internal compass along the way.
I love that. And while we might never be able to perfectly predict our future emotions, understanding how our amazing, flawed brains work, it gives us a better shot at navigating those twists and turns.
And who knows, maybe we even learn to enjoy the ride a little bit more.
That's the goal, isn't it? To find joy in the journey, even when it's messy and unpredictable.
So as we wrap up here, I think the biggest takeaway is that happiness isn't about achieving some perfect state of bliss, but about approaching life with curiosity, with this healthy skepticism and this willingness to learn and grow.
Beautifully said. It's about questioning those assumptions, challenging those societal expectations, and really tuning into what truly resonates with us on a personal level.
Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to figure out what works, what brings us joy, and what makes this whole messy, beautiful experience of life feel meaningful.
And that's a journey worth taking, even if we stumble along the way.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into stumbling on happiness. We'll see you next time for another exploration of the human experience.